Inside the Birds is back, everyone. What's going on? Geoff Mosher, Adam Caplan for an Inside the Birds episode that's going to lead you into the holiday weekend, the Memorial Day weekend. So we hope everybody has a fantastic Memorial Day weekend. We have a lot to talk about in this episode. I know people already have been lining up with the questions for us to answer. It was a big week for the Eagles. The big news came down, I guess, Tuesday night into Wednesday, and that's Andy Weidl will be departing the Philadelphia Eagles front office to join the Pittsburgh Steelers front office. We will get into that and explain how that came to be. We'll talk about the departures and some of the promotions and incoming as a whole, and sort of try to put our best I don't want to call it spin, our best intel and our best vibe about where we think the direction of this front office is going in this sort of, it's an off-season of change. Certainly a lot of change, so we'll get into that. We will talk about some of the press conferences. Jonathan Gannon had a press conference this week. I was there. He answered a decent amount of questions about scheme and personnel, Adam, so there's a lot we got to get into on that. So this will be a pretty meaty, and also, obviously there was an acquisition there with Jimmy Moreland, and we'll get into him as well. So this will be a pretty meaty Inside the Birds podcast, a perfect kind of episode to throw on if you're headed down the shore any of these days and you're noticing that a million of your friends are headed down there with you and you're not moving very fast on the expressway or whatever route you take to get down there. So you're not going to the shore, are you?
No, I'm not. No.
Yeah, you're not.
We'll get
it's
you
not
there.
You.
We'll get you there in an hour. Yeah, for sure. No, well, I was just in the Outer Banks, so I don't.
That's true.
Again.
Yeah.
I'll play. Although the weather we're going to get this weekend back here in the Philadelphia area, New Jersey area, is going to be spotty with rain and storms. So this is the stormy season. But
do you remember last year on Memorial Day? I think it was like 55 degrees and rainy on Memorial Day last year, if I'm not mistaken. So, that was not fun. So hopefully this year it'll be a little bit better.
Yeah, no doubt. So, yeah, and we'll pick off right where we're on Monday. Well, one thing to tell you about Q&A's back, great show. But
yeah,
we'll certainly pick up where we were Monday when we dropped the Monday show, because it's just like clockwork. Well, we said something, and then 24 hours later it happened. But it does set up a lot of change. I cannot believe, doing research for the show, how much change the Eagles have had since early January. It's a little bit deeper than I thought.
It's massive. It's massive. So Q&A did a really good job of discussing, and we'll talk about it when we get into Jonathan Gannon discussion, because I asked them specifically for this week and for next week to take defense then offense, and don't just give me like scouting report stuff, right? I want like scheme breakdown, personnel, how they fit, how they blend. I said put your best like coordinator cap on or analyst cap on and really explain to the people what things mean, from alignments, right, to coverages, everything. And I thought they did a really awesome job. And it wasn't surprising to me, but even they're kind of like the rest of us, where they think they have an idea of how, especially on the front line, pieces might fit, but they're not exactly sure, because the Eagles don't have the personnel to be a pure 3-4, and they don't have the personnel to be a pure 4-3. Well, they do, but they wouldn't be effective if they were only a 4-3, because they brought in personnel that doesn't fit that. So they're sort of in that same mode we are, of trying to figure out what Jonathan Gannon's going to do and how he's going to do it. And I thought Quentin, especially with his background on defense, did an excellent job of sort of saying where he expects guys to be positioned, and not only how that will influence the front end, but also the back end of the defense and what they need to do to kind of have that marriage between front and back end and make it all work. They believe it's going to work, but I thought they both did a really good job of staying objective and pointing out why it might not work, or why the play caller himself, Jonathan Gannon, might not, capitalize on everything that he's got if he doesn't change some of his play calling ways as well. It was really good.
Right. From a schematic standpoint, that was the beauty of this show, is because they were able to attack kind of things that they thought they saw last season, moving forward with the new personnel to bring that forward, and obviously Bradberry, who they got last week. So it's good. Look, this is the beauty of May and June shows. You can get into schematics and changes and all that. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is that, and our new newsletter comes out today, actually. So it may have reached many of your inboxes already, and we've made some subtle changes again. We're always trying to upgrade the newsletter, make it more visually attractive, bring everything that we do into your inbox in one spot, so you don't have to go search all over from the YouTube channel to the website to the podcast platform and anything else. So hopefully everybody's enjoying that. It's free, so sign up if you can at our website or in our description info boxes on our podcast and YouTube platforms. We really appreciate all the people so far who've jumped aboard, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback about the newsletter. So very glad you're enjoying it. Tell your friends, tell your aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters and everybody you know. All right, so let's get into... I think with this Andy Weidl discussion, Adam, we kind of have to break it up into what's happened. We have to explain, the situation of him going to Pittsburgh, why, and then where that leaves the Eagles and what their direction is going to in the first place. So let's start by this way. I think most of our listeners, anybody who's been listening to Inside the Birds for at least 2 weeks, were not surprised when the Steelers named Omar Khan their general manager. In fact, I think in our last podcast, we did a pretty good job of laying out what we thought was going to happen based on what we heard, which was Omar Khan likely to get the job. He is a guy who came up not through the traditional scouting sector. He's going to need a real solid personnel guy. Andy Weidl interviewed for the GM job, but if he didn't get it, he would make sense to be the personnel guy. And we were hearing, that he had a really good interview with Mike Tomlin. So lo and behold, Omar Khan gets the job. Andy Weidl gets the assistant GM job. So it's a great opportunity for Andy. He's from Pittsburgh. So he's working for the organization where he first got started. It's good that he hit it off with Mike Tomlin. So there's a connection there because as we detailed, Mike Tomlin isn't just the head coach. He has a huge influence now in the front office and the personnel going on there. And it's also good, and I think we touched on this a little bit in the last podcast, but we have more intel that Andy is going to work with Omar Khan. They know each other going back to the early 2000s because they both got their start in the Saints front office. So the Steelers are an organization, if you've listened to our show throughout the years, we've told you that they value two things, right? And these two things are satisfied. One, they value promoting from within, grooming, and getting guys up through their system. Omar Khan's been there for almost 20 years, so that is a guy that they have been grooming for a long time. And two, they value Pittsburgh ties more so than any franchise I know valuing being where you're from. Andy Weidl's from Pittsburgh. Kevin Colbert, their departing GM, is from Pittsburgh. Brandon Hunt, who we've talked about before, is from Pittsburgh. Doug Whaley worked there. He's from Pittsburgh. It's really a unique thing about how much they value the understanding of working for that franchise and what that city is all about. And so really they tied it together. They got a Pittsburgh guy with Andy Weidl, and they got a guy they've been grooming who's been in Pittsburgh for a long time now in Omar Khan.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense. The thing that you pointed out about New Orleans, I didn't know that when we did our show Monday morning. Folks, if you haven't heard it, we said that there's definitely a possibility that Weidl's going to be his right-hand man because he knows the building. But I didn't know about the New Orleans stuff. That's interesting that they've known each other for 20 years. And we'd said that they knew each other, but I didn't know it like that, as you pointed out. So that probably has a lot to do with it, other than Andy knows the organization. He's highly qualified. We'll get into a minute about what this means for the Eagles scouting staff, because it's obviously pretty major. And good luck to Andy. That's he's hometown team and all that. But it does leave a void. There's no question about it, because the thing, and we've not talked about this in the last show, but we could certainly should mention it now. He's the one that sets the board, the draft board, and obviously heavily influences free agency in terms of his grading and all that stuff. So, but the big one is on the college side, and their scouting staff, which started the year with 20 people. We'll get into what it looks like now. So to me, it's big. He sets the draft board, and they remember they lost both directors, both personnel directors a couple months ago. So think about it. Their top three guys under Roseman all left for assistant GM jobs.
Yes. And you could say top four if you consider Catherine Rach going from her position, which was, I believe, director of football administration? Operation. Right. Director of football operations to go to the Cleveland Browns. And there were others. We talked about some of the scouts who were fired. We talked about some of the people who, like Tom Donahoe, by the way, maybe not considered top 4 as far as day-to-day responsibility, but the impact that he had on Andy Weidl, who he's known since both of them were in Pittsburgh, to people who underneath Andy Weidl on the Eagles' personnel staff. We were told that Tom Donahoe was a very respected, very influential person for not just Howie, but for Andy and for a lot of the scouts. So he's gone, and listen, we were both told this. It doesn't mean he's retired. He's stepping away from the Eagles. His contract, I believe, is up. We'll see if he resurfaces somewhere. But that's another big loss. And so, Adam, I have a I have a phrase that you always remind me of that I bring up, and that's, no franchise hires or fires coaches, position coaches especially, assistant coaches, after making the playoffs more than the Philadelphia Eagles, right? So now I may have to amend this and say no franchise not only fires more position coaches after making the playoffs than the Eagles, but also reshuffles its entire front office, like the Philadelphia Eagles, coming off what is largely seen as not only a very good year to go from 4 wins to 9 back into the playoffs, but also 2 fairly good off seasons that have them trending in the right direction, at least as far as the roster looks, as far as we can tell. You never know, but the team looks way better. I don't think you can argue that the moves that have been made have largely been really positive for the Eagles, and now you're looking at a front office that's been responsible for a lot of these moves. Now, Howie has the final say, but these are all people who are involved in the scouting, the evaluation, the procurement, the saying goodbye to certain players. It's a complete now reshuffle, and you're going to see a lot of people ushered in, new people ushered in, and some people are now promoted, and that makes me wonder why. I know some of these guys you were going to lose anyway, so I'm not questioning every single person who walks out the door, Adam. But as we have talked about on some other podcasts, what we're hearing is that the Eagles are going in a different direction. They're getting younger, going to get more diverse. And as I've said a couple of times, I don't know how it's been phrased to you. To me, it's been a little bit more forward-thinking, a little bit more progressive in their scouting and talent evaluation operations. So I don't exactly know what to expect from that, but I'm sort of fascinated by it. And the timing of it is very interesting.
I would say maybe even more analytical, if possible. I just, because it came to the forward thinking part, as you said. So what you and I did over the last 3 weeks, because we knew that there were going to be more changes than had been reported by us and other people. They hadn't been done yet. Mm-hmm. And obviously the Weidl one was major. And Andy's an old school scout, so to speak, an old school executive, and now he's out. Donahoe was a big mentor of his, and also Howie Roseman, how he brought him in. So you do wonder that they're going to get younger, as you said, more diverse, but certainly younger. Is this going to change now? Are other people who had been in the analytics department getting more of a say, or it's going to be like Cleveland, where I remember they promoted Ken Kovash, who was their analytics director, having more of a say. I don't know. I'm looking at that because you and I asked some people over the last couple of weeks who are familiar with the Eagles situation, and a couple of them mentioned, analytics are going to be even bigger than they were before. But the problem with that is, if you just look at the signings and the draft picks, you can't say everything's analytics. In fact, I don't see a lot of McDuffie was. You and I know this. McDuffie was probably going to be the pick if they didn't get Jordan Davis.
Right.
He doesn't match up to production for analytics or the measurables for analytics. So how's that analytical data? I don't see that.
I don't either. I don't know. I think Nakobe Dean's a really good player, but I'm not sure you would call him an analytics guy. It's not. I don't think he ran a blazing 40, if I'm not mistaken. I know he was injured or nursing some injuries in this offseason.
Yeah.
So maybe he ran faster, obviously ran faster. But I don't think he's like a workout warrior type. He's just a really good, smart, instinctive, and talented linebacker. I'm not trying to say he's not physically talented. I'm just saying I don't. It doesn't strike you the way the Davion Taylor pick was, because Davion could run a 4.3, like getting out of bed in a straight line really well, and nobody had heard of him, but the Eagles sort of propped him up because they knew he was like an athletics wonder kid. So I agreed. That's what makes the timing so strange, because I think, again, the last 2 off seasons after what we've reported about the 2020 and the 2019 drafts and everything that's gone on, we don't need to rehash it. We know the process was flawed and it largely started at the top. You don't blame these people who are fired for it or not back. But after that, it's like they settled things out. They've had 2 good drafts, or at least what looks like 2 good drafts, some pretty good free agency, good trades. Things are on the way up. And now all of a sudden you're saying, let's flip what we do. We need to do something differently. I'm never against somebody trying to clean up a process, streamline a process, make it more efficient. But I also don't understand maybe the concept of fixing something that might not be broken either. And this is something that you and I talked about. I don't know that fans, A, can get truly emotionally invested in because they don't know a lot of these names, right? And B, some of the impact of this may not be felt for 2 or 3 years down the road. We'll just have to see. But I hope we're not coming back to this podcast in 2 or 3 years saying, hey, we told you all this change was going to make something happen. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing because you don't know who they're going to hire. These hires could be really good. I don't know that. I'm just saying to change your identity of what you're doing after coming off what's working for you the last 2 years seems odd.
Yeah, it's hard to put my finger on exactly where this is going. You and I asked a lot of opinions of people who either work for the Eagles in the past or somewhere else, or have friends who've worked for the Eagles, in scouting and so forth and operations. And there are a lot of theories. The Eagles, we've talked about many times, want to be cutting edge. They want to be different. There's nothing wrong with that. But as you said, and it's very true, when you have back-to-back drafts that are really lauded around the league, why so much change? And that to me is
right. Now, some people will say, and this is important because people have asked us about it, you can't control people who leave for much better jobs, okay? And the Eagles have lost so many people, those 4 in particular that we talked about, that it would have been impossible to keep all of them because some of them went on to better jobs. However, it is absolutely fair to point out that the Eagles could have, and to my knowledge, they didn't. Maybe something will come out. I don't know. We might get information. But the Eagles could have tried to keep or retain Andy Weidl from leaving by saying, okay, we'll upgrade you from director, vice president of player personnel to assistant general manager. We will match that title and pay you just as well or give you a bump up to keep you. They could have done that if they wanted to, but they did not. And so that, I think, is another illustration that they are going in a different direction. And the fact that we know, and we've reported, that these moves that have been made in the front office have been made by Howie Roseman. It's not like Andy brought some of these guys, like Charles Walls or other people, and said, here, I want to hire these guys. Howie, what do you think? And Howie said, yes. No, these are moves that as we understand it, Howie Roseman has made. So already, even before Andy even left to take this Pittsburgh job, it seemed like Howie was starting to take this front office into a direction, and I'm not quite sure what that would have meant for Andy Weidl in the future. I mean, you had reported it, and it's true. They weren't going to fire him. They didn't fire him. He's leaving. But we've also reported that they were interviewing guys like Brandon Hunt and Morocco Brown for a pretty high-ranking position. So, which he has not hired anyone for a higher-ranking position to our knowledge, like an assistant GM type position yet, if he does. So again, like if you're Andy Weidl and you're like, wait, you're hiring people for a position that might even be higher than me. And when I took over this job, and this is true, when he took over the job from Joe Douglas, that was his front office, that was his scouting staff, I should say, to run. Obviously, Howie had to give the thumbs up or thumbs down, but it was supposed to be his decisions. And like you said, he set the board. Didn't feel like it was with Howie making all the moves that he's made this offseason, that dynamic felt different, and it was different.
So my understanding is if Weidl remained, he would have the same title.
Mm-hmm.
But as you said, they brought in Brandon Hunt. They still may hire him. I know you have an update on that.
Yeah.
So he interviewed. He also interviewed for 2 assistant GM jobs, right? With other 2, was it Buffalo and Miami?
I think Buffalo. He interviewed for he interviewed for a GM job in Vegas before they hired the guy from the Patriots, and then more recently in Buffalo along with Philly.
Okay. And then I know there's another team involved wanted to talk to him. But the fact of the matter is, they are open to hiring a or promoting either within or hiring a assistant GM. We'll see what happens. I know that was their plan coming into this. So they haven't done it yet. They definitely wanted 2 player personnel directors. They have one of them, as you mentioned, Charles Walls, and that's a big move for him. We'll get into that.
Yeah.
But this is incredible. To start the year, Geoff, they had 20 people listed under their scouting staff. They have operations staff and scouting. And 8 of them are gone from that 20, and 7 are promoted, which is a good thing. But 8 are gone from that, from the original 20 to start the year. So there's certainly been a lot of change.
So if it winds up being a shift toward more analytics, which is again kind of strange because it felt like they had found a great balance the last 2 drafts of analytics and not having to be overly analytic. They have an entire analytics staff. So, but Catherine, I believe, was the head of the I think she presided over that department after Andrew Berry left for Cleveland, and now she's there.
Right, definitely operations, but it's certainly, I don't want to say it's up in the air. They know what they want to do, but we've asked a lot of people familiar with the Eagles situation, and no one can put their finger on it because they've been really lauded in the analytics community for years about forward thinking. We know when Doug Peterson was here, the use of analytical data, when to go for it, when not to go for it, and so forth. And boy, did it work for 2017. It helped them win a Super Bowl.
Right.
But it's interesting here going forward because this could be a brand new era here. Who knows? But I think you nailed it a couple weeks ago because when you talked about how they want to be forward thinking, that I would say the one thing I've heard is where you and I agree. Definitely heard but what that means, we don't know what that means yet. That's what we're trying to figure out. Yeah,
I'm almost afraid to find out. But we'll try.
What could it mean?
You know what? I have a feeling. I don't know this for sure, but at some point, and I think we said this last show, but we'll repeat it again. The Eagles don't release all of their promotions and new titles one by one, right? The ones we've reported are happening, but they're going to come out one day and release an entire list that tells you what the new front office structure is. And without a doubt, there'll be some names on it that even we haven't heard, right? Because there always is. So once we start seeing the titles, but as you always say, it's not necessarily about the titles because sometimes the titles are just a way to give somebody a certain pay. But we'll know when some of these names come out and do around. Like any name that seems weird or a promotion that we didn't see coming, we'll know that that's like a signal about something. So we'll say it's sort of like when who'd the Eagles bring in a couple of years ago to help with their scouting? It was like a guy who'd been around for a while. Was it Dorsey?
Oh, yes, as a consultant, yes.
Yeah, they kind of brought him as a consultant, but when that happened, it was like, oh, okay, that's not just your run-of-the-mill everyday consultant. That's a guy who's been a GM in a couple of spots, right? So, like, your radar goes up. So we'll see some things, I imagine, that perk our radar, and it'll give us a better idea of maybe where they're going as a team. But as I sit here and we do this show, Adam, I can't help but think, like, if you're Andy Weidl, man, you just had a really good break in your career because it looked like where you were with the Eagles, you may have reached your plateau there and team's going on. And then the next thing you know, bam, the next day you're the assistant general manager of one of the best franchises in all of sports.
Your hometown team.
And your hometown team. And wow, how about that? I mean, we were like 2 weeks ago, your brother's getting fired. And by the way, Casey Weidl, I would be shocked if he did not. I don't want to say shocked, but I'm from what I understand, he'll probably get a job in that department with the Steelers. If not, it might even be somewhere else. But he'll wind up on his feet. But yeah, one day your brother's getting fired, and you're like looking left and right. All these guys are gone, and the next day you're the assistant general manager of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's unbelievable. Really kudos to Andy. He's a good dude. And Casey, we heard multiple teams are in on him, including the Steelers, and there's another team. So good for him. And we'll go over the revised staff as we know it. The changes are just. It's 5 years. We've never seen anything like this before. Now, as you said earlier, it's a bad thing. It's some guys got promoted from in-house. Some guys left for other jobs. Some guys were not brought back. Some guys' contracts expired. They were not brought back. Some were fired, as you said. So a lot of change, and we'll see what this is going to mean in probably a week or so when they make these announcements.
All right, so why don't we take now a look at the big overview of all the people that are gone, on top of the 5 we already mentioned.
All right, so we talked about Andy Weidl, right? He's the assistant GM for the Steelers. They haven't announced it yet, but we know that's happening.
Yeah.
And you have the good background on the Saints connection with Omar Khan, which makes a lot of sense. So, okay, Tom Donahoe, you mentioned senior advisor. We're heard he's not definitely retiring. He may wind up with another team. We don't know about going back to Pittsburgh, though. I know there's some rumors about that. We don't know that. Everybody knows about Ian Cunningham, Brandon Brown they're both assistant GMs.
Mm-hmm.
Remember about Catherine Rach being the assistant GM of the Browns. That has not been announced yet, but that's definitely happening. You mentioned Casey Weidl. Evan Pritt, the scouting assistant, gone. TJ McCray. Now, we're told with him he was a player personnel executive who was brought in by Joe Douglas. His contract was not renewed. He was not fired. Just to clear that up, because it had been reported by others that he was fired. We were told he was not fired.
Potato, but okay.
Yeah, well, no, but here's the thing. They would have to pay him from a monetary standpoint.
Right.
Although he would have a offset. A lot of teams, sometimes they just don't renew. They'd rather not fire them, because let's say it's an older person, you fire them, they know they're not going to work.
Yeah.
You got to pay them.
Yeah.
So you'd rather, and TJ's in his early 50s, as I understand it. Sean Heinlein, his contract he was let go. What we're told is he should have a job within a week or 2 weeks or so. He's got interest, as we understand it.
Well, there's a report out there already. I don't know if you saw that Heinlein's going to the Browns. So.
Okay, yeah, that was the team, but we had not heard that he actually has signed a contract or it was done. We know that was the team. That was one of the 2 teams that were in on him. There's a team in the NFC and the team in the AFC. It's the Browns.
All right.
The team in the NFC was in early in the process, but we heard they were out. And yes, it should be the Browns. But the interesting thing about the Browns is, not just with Heinlein, the Eagles and Browns have exchanged personnel people.
Yeah. We'll trade you Catherine Rach for Charles Wall, or Catherine Rach and Sean Heinlein for Charles Walls. Who says no? Right,
but there are others, which we'll get to. So Heinlein expect to go to the Browns once the contract is worked out, as we understand it. So those are the ones we definitely know have left. The promotions from within, as we reported most of these a couple weeks ago. This one just happened with the last 2 weeks. Jeff Scott, who came over for Washington as a senior pro scout. He's now that he takes over for, his title is director of football operations. What that winds up meaning, see, this is the problem with these titles. Every team has a different look on what that means. It could be analytics. It could be something else with Eagles. We'll get better clarification once they make announcements. John Ferrari is definitely going to be promoted. I know there's a report about him being the assistant GM. What we're told is that's what it could be as high as that, but that's not definitely happening. He's going to get promoted. He's highly thought of. He's an operations guy. Remember, they got him from the league office. He's got great value to them.
Yeah.
Apparently, he's great at what he does. But what's
he's what I call the Philadelphia Eagles man of mystery, John Ferrari.
Yeah.
Because
that's what I mean. What scouting does he have?
I don't know. You can't find someone who knows anything about the Eagles like intimately who will tell you who won't mention John Ferrari's name. They all talk about John Ferrari this, John Ferrari that, and if you showed me a picture of John Ferrari, I probably would not be able to identify it.
It's funny. I went when we were doing research on this. I went to the team website just to see what he looked like. He had a buzz cut.
Right. There's like 3 guys who run the Eagles. I'm saying this facetiously, but what I mean is they have really, really important roles, and you almost never hear their names. 1 being John Ferrari, 2, Joe Pedunzio, right? Because he's like considered the assistant special teams coach, which doesn't sound like a really high-profile type of title, but you and I both know. I mean, he's Mr. Alabama. He's their connection to every single player from Alabama or the SEC. He's had like 4 different roles. Chip Kelly brought him in, then he left, then Howie brought him back. I mean, Manowitz they love this guy. Manowitz brought him back. Right. I mean, yeah, that's another guy.
Valuable.
That's another guy. You talk to people who know the Eagles. Oh man, that Joe Pedunzio this, Joe Pedunzio that. How often do you ever see his name?
Well, he's had great intel on the Alabama players, because if you remember, for years running joke was, what in the world is going on with the Eagles and not drafting Alabama players? And boom, all of a sudden they've done it.
Yeah.
And
They actually started listening to him. Yeah.
Right. I guess. Panunzio's got great intel, obviously. So it's another good job by Roseman keeping these guys. Because, look, he could have walked away from some people that were on Chip's staff, and he didn't. He retained some of those guys. So
right.
All right. So
wait, the third guy is obviously Jeremiah Washburn, who is like every year he's got to save either some position group or some front office, title position that needs to be filled because he can scout and he can coach, and so they literally now he is coaching edge rushers. Okay, his dad would be proud. Jim, well, I'm sure his dad is proud. It's not like his dad dead or anything, but he's coaching. Rushers. Yeah, he's coaching like wide nine edge rushers. Last year he was like the director of player personnel. 2 years ago he was like the assistant offensive line coach. I mean, they just give him a new job every year.
Yeah, actually, he was. I think last year he was only doing D-line.
Yeah, I'm kidding. It was 2 years ago. He was director of player personnel.
Shocking when they did that. In fact, if you remember, the shocking thing was he was over Ian Cunningham technically.
Yes.
Didn't understand it. Like
no.
Things happen with Eagles sometimes. We don't know what their title means,
right?
But they're not the only team that does this. Like, you actually have to ask people, okay, well, what do you do? What exactly is your role? Because we don't understand it. The title.
Do you remember when Juan Castillo got named when he went from offensive line coach to defensive coordinator? That I almost was equally surprised when Jeremiah Washburn went from assistant offensive line coach to director of player personnel.
Did that ever happen before in the history of the
I'm like, what? Who does that?
Didn't know. I remember getting the release. I'm like, okay, what does this mean? I don't understand it. Anyway, so to finish this off, so those are the departures, 9 departures that we know about. When you talk about Donahoe, Ian Cunningham, the guys who became who got better jobs, Catherine, of course. In fact, wait a minute, 4 assistant GMs. Think about it. Catherine Raich, Brandon Brown, Ian Cunningham, and Andy Weidl. Has that ever happened in history?
No. No. People have misidentified the Eagles as a GM factory. They are not a GM factory. There's only one current GM in the league from the Eagles, and he literally just spent a year there, and that was Andrew Berry, right? They are an assistant GM factory. They just churn them out. Incredible. So we'll see if any of them become GMs in the future. I think that would really be an awesome testament to what, well, I mean, you say that, but, I feel like every 3 years you'll see like the same names interview for GMs, and then a couple will get, and then those who don't, it's like they never get back into that cycle. It's sort of a fascinating it's a phenomenon in the NFL that I can't really understand. It's sort of like the way NHL coaches are hired just to be fired and then hired, like John Tortorella. Like if the Flyers hire him, hasn't he coached for every single team on the East Coast in the last 10 years?
Let me tell you something. My last year at ESPN, I met him. He's a super cool guy. I know he's fiery and all that.
Oh, he is intense.
But that's it. Most GMs don't get once you're fired, you don't get a second chance. Bill Polian did.
That's true.
But most don't. No, you're absolutely right. It's weird. So
Jerry Reese has 2 championship rings, right? He won 2 championship rings in 4 years with the Giants. Got fired a couple of years later. He's had like maybe an interview or two, but you barely heard of him.
Football, I think. Yeah.
So, it's amazing.
To finish these promotions off, so we talk about Ferrari. Well, we don't know exact title that he's going to get. It could be as high as the assistant GM. Alan Walking, we put this out a couple weeks ago. Assistant. So he was director of college scouting. His new title, we're told, should be, again, title, assistant director of player personnel, which they've not had before.
Oh.
I don't know of. Could be wrong, but I don't remember them having an assistant director of.
No, they've had co-director of player personnel, not assistant director of player personnel.
Max Gruder is going to go from the assistant pro director to the director of pro scouting.
Yeah.
Dave Caldwell, we mentioned 2 or 3 weeks ago, probably 2 weeks ago, personnel executive to an elevated role. I don't know what that's. He's sort of like a consultant, though. They give him scouting stuff. I just don't know what his title will be, but he'll have an elevated role. Ryan Myers, who's the longtime West Coast scout who Tom Gamble brought in with Chip Kelly. He's promoted from West Coast area scout to assistant college director. Phil Baia, who's their Southeast area scout, he's to an elevated role. I don't know exactly what that's going to mean in scouting. Amina Solomon's going to be she was a pro scout who came from Temple.
Right.
There was another team trying to hire her, so I know everybody loves her. She's apparently really good.
Good.
To an elevated scouting role. Could be a coordinator role. We'll see, but she's going to have a new role. So again, folks, on just the scouting side, not the operations side, just the scouting side, to start the new year, 20 people listed under there, 8 are gone, but 7 have been promoted. So lots of moves on the scouting side.
Fascinating. Now, I know I've told this story before, but we have new listeners based on our audience numbers lately. So I'll tell it again. 3 or 4 years ago, the Eagles at one time. I laugh. I can't get through this with a straight face. But that one time they had 3 directors of college scouting. They had a director of college scouting, an assistant director of college scouting, and a senior director of college scouting.
Can I tell you something very funny on that? I got scolded for making fun of them when they had 4 of them or 3 of them?
That 3, unless there was another one that I didn't know.
There might have been 4, director, assistant director, senior director.
Well, there might have been a senior assistant director of college.
So I got scolded. Hey, they didn't say don't make fun of us, but I think you got it wrong. They all have a role. You understand? Because this is where we were laughing about whatever their role is, whatever the title says, it's not really what they're doing.
Right, and we knew that, but it was still funny to see that. Yeah, right. Well, of course we knew they had roles, but I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You got it.
All right. So that's some really interesting stuff with the Eagles front office. Again, we will see how this thing goes. You talked about the guys they added, right? Oh, no, you're going to do that next.
Hang on. I didn't do that. That's next. You want me to hold off?
Hold off real quick because I want to give a shout out to our friends at New Edition Consulting. It's a boutique newsletter consultancy that partners with entrepreneurs, early stage startups, and media entities looking to launch, maintain, and grow their newsletter offering. Because an intentional, consistent newsletter is the spine that holds your brand's community-building efforts together. It allows you to connect deeper with your audience than you can on your social media channels, all right? New Edition provides one-on-one, end-to-end, 360-degree newsletter support to all of their busy and talented clients. If you've been looking to launch or transform your newsletter offering but simply haven't had the time, tools, or support, head to neweditionconsulting.co and book a free exploratory call with their team. They do a great job on the Inside the Birds newsletter. That's New Edition Consulting.
And they're local, Philly.
Local. That's right. All right. Let us go to some of the... All right. So this is it. I laugh because I know when you were going through some of those names, there's like 4 or 5 people on Twitter, right? On Eagles Twitter who are just so locked in they're like impressively locked in. They know everything going on with like like a Greg Richards type. You know him from Twitter, right? He knows like who the assistant area scouts coffee maker is. That's how locked in he is. But for most people, it's just names. But these ones that we're going to talk about now are fairly important because they're coming from somewhere else and they're getting elevated roles. And some names will sound familiar. So go ahead, Adam.
Charles Wall started. He's with the Eagles already. He came in 2 or 3 weeks ago. He's the former Browns national scout who's now he's one of their directors of player personnel. This is interesting because this is a big jump for him.
Yeah.
To go from a national scout to one of the directors. Now, you would think he would take the role of Ian Cunningham because that he comes from the college side. We know Matt Russell's going to be a senior advisor who Howie Roseman's known for years. He was under, as you know, the late Tom Heckert.
Yes, with the Eagles, right, and then Broncos, right.
Right. So they knew each other, and obviously Howie's known him for years. So he's back after got to be. It's well over a decade that he was away.
So this is one of the few hires that maybe has the apples to apples. Like he's going to take Tom Donahoe's job most likely. He's going to be a senior advisor.
Right, more or less. Right.
Okay.
Right. We just don't know the exact title.
Right.
We know, but as you said, we know what he's going to provide because he's been scouting for several decades. So Jeremy Gray is coming in from University of Arizona. He was a college scouting director, which is just oversee recruiting. But the one thing I check with, I know someone who worked with him with the Vikings who told me about him. His dad obviously is Jerry Gray, the former longtime NFL defensive backs coach. His dad, Jerry, was a D coordinator, D backs coach. He's been in the league for decades. So Jeremy had limited work in pro personnel with the Vikings, but what we're told is there was another team involved trying to hire him, but the Eagles got him and they gave him a little bit of a elevated role. to assistant director of pro scouting. So that's a nice jump for him. And then, Rod Streeter. Yeah, Rod Streeter's brought in weeks ago. He was with the Browns. Again, another former Brown. He was a scouting assistant with the Browns. He will be a college area scout. You might remember him, folks, from Temple University as an undrafted free agent with the Raiders. What a great story. Pretty good dude. I know people have worked with him. And he's actually been in scouting 2020. This will be his third or fourth year in scouting.
Yeah, wow. Rod Streeter, I think he may have spent a week or two on my fantasy team one year when I was not doing well, and I thought because he would have like a long catch because he had speed, right, every once in a while, and then you thought, oh, maybe this is the week he catches like 3 for 75 and a TD. Good but size, yeah, Rod Streeter, right. Yeah, right. Size, right.
Yeah. Right. So then, all right, so that's the ones that we know are done. There's some others, but
there are some others, yeah.
Yeah, look, the bottom line is that they're going to have, between promotions, people leaving on their own accord or got let go, they're going to have anywhere from 16 to 20 or more changes. This is just, as you said, when you win like this, you don't think this will happen, but there could be a new beginning. Who knows? Well, it's fascinating. I don't care about the titles. I care about what these people do. But the big one, the loss of Andy Weidl, because he sets that draft board, and these last year drafts are pretty good. I know, Howie obviously was the one who's making picks.
Right.
And not having Tom Donahue as a voice of reason, we were heard. That's what Tom did, is the voice of reason, because he's been there and done it. And he's done it for over 40 years.
Right. So who sets the board now? We don't know.
I have no idea. I don't know, because they're not done their directors. And the question would be if John Ferrari gets it. See, here's the thing. He doesn't have a large scouting background.
Right.
So,
like you can call him and Omar Khan might have sort of similar backgrounds in that they're not board setters because they're not traditional tried and true scouts. So if John Ferrari is an AGM, they're still going to need a really, a high-ranking personnel person. So that brings us back to what Howie Roseman was doing about a couple of weeks ago. He brought in Brandon Hunt from Pittsburgh for an interview, brought in Morocco Brown from the Indianapolis Colts. He's their college scouting director. For an interview, we had been told that Rand Carthon was on the radar. Did not happen. I guess he was blocked from interviewing with the Eagles. And we had last heard that the search isn't necessarily over. So the only thing is, I'm not sure. I don't know if the information has changed or how he's sort of changed, or this whole thing was never set in stone from the beginning. Whether he's looking for specifically an assistant GM or like you said, it could be Ferrari. So maybe he's looking for now a different title. I just know that when he interviewed Brandon Hunt, he really liked the concept. He liked the idea of bringing Brandon Hunt in. They interviewed. He still likes the kid. I haven't told he doesn't like the kid, but I know how he was looking for experience. He wanted to commit to someone he felt could really kind of grab the front office by the rails a little bit, by the horns. And the fact that he hasn't hired Brandon Hunt yet maybe exemplifies that he's still looking for a little bit. Doesn't mean Brandon Hunt can't be hired. And if he does, I don't know what the job title would be. I imagine it would be sort of high ranking, but I don't know. So we'll see. Because I know some people ask me, now that Khan is the GM and Weidl's there, and Brandon Hunt is actually, as I understand it, he doesn't have a job with the Steelers or is not going to have a job with the Steelers going forward unless something changes. That's just what I heard and understand. He could be available for the Eagles, but we'll have to see if Howie brings him in a second time and interviews him again or interviews other people. Have you heard if he plans to interview other people?
Yeah, after Hunt, there was a list because again they got denied. You and I were told about with Rand Carthon,
right?
Because again, he's already a director of player personnel. Like you would have to, you're talking
about Rand Carthon, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The only way you could interview him or get permission for him to be AGM or GM.
Right.
And the AGM is definitely in play. Like they what we were told to start all this 3 or 4 weeks ago was they wanted 2 directors and an AGM. They're very open to an AGM. Definitely 2 directors to replace the guys who left. But this is a new beginning. We again, once the titles are announced, we're going to have to find out. We have 75% of it. We know what they're going to do, but there's going to be some guys who are like, okay, what is this guy doing? We don't know. We'll have to find out because like with Brandon Hunt, he's the pro scouting coordinator. He's the pro director. He was the pro director. That for I don't know. He was over there. He was there for well over a decade. See, that's a big jump for him to go from pro director to AGM. That's technically you go from pro director to director of player personnel to AGM to GM. So that'd be a jump for him.
Right.
But, I know the Eagles have had their eye on him. I know Roseman did. He likes him. So we'll see if they can get anything done. Other than that, that's mostly all that we know. Well, there are 2 or 3 things we had heard. We went with this. We went with the Weidl stuff on Monday to be Omar's partner because we heard from multiple sources. We were pretty certain like that was definitely in play and had a good chance of happening, and it did. And I get it, but again, to move this forward here, Andy setting that college board's a big deal. The college draft, and Roseman, other than Milton Williams, really followed the board. And guess what? That one looks like that's going to have a chance to be a pretty good hit. So you hope with all these the revamped front office, whatever it's going to look like, and all the new people that come in and all the promotions, that the board's still pretty good. But you need someone who's does things by the book. To me, that's pretty important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's really important, and who that person is and that person's experience is going to really matter in this situation. So, by the way, just to clarify, I want just to understand what I was told by people about Brandon Hunt in Pittsburgh. I mean, Andy Weidl is now the top personnel guy, not Brandon. And then I had heard, and I saw it reported too, that they're bringing in Sheldon White, I believe, to be their like a director of player personnel type.
Oh,
so
Sheldon, yeah.
Sheldon White he actually interviewed. No, he interviewed for the Eagles when Chip Kelly was looking for his personnel guy. It was one of the first interviews. Right. Yeah, I actually met him at the Senior Bowl. Okay. Yeah, then he interviewed. He interviewed a couple of different spots. He works with right. He was with the Lions at the time, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
So if he's there, and Brandon was the pro scouting coordinator. So if they bring in a guy to basically preside over pro scouting, and it's Sheldon White, then what's left for Brandon? That's why people are speculating that. After not getting the job, he's from what they're hearing, that he's not going to have a role there in Pittsburgh, or that he might just get a better role somewhere else. So we'll see.
Like in Philly, who knows, right?
Yes, like in Philly, or somewhere else. We'll see. All right. So that pretty much just puts the finishing touches on all the front office stuff, right? That's, we'll be talking about this for quite a while, I think. Maybe not as extensively as today with all the name changing, but more about the identity and what's going on with the team going forward.
Yes. And then, we said earlier about how there are definitely a lot of people who are surprised around the league. I think that's probably what we've got the last week or so. They just don't understand. As you said earlier, look, some people moved on to better jobs. 4 people moved on to be assistant GMs, which is incredible. I don't know if that's ever happened before, but, it's good for those people. But, look, there's some people who were highly regarded, who were like Casey Weidl, and Sean Hyland, who were highly regarded. Hyland that contract with the Browns should be done by very soon. But the thing with Hyland, because he had been in the league forever, over 2 decades, he got interest for what we're told, like almost immediately. So that's good for him.
Yep.
So we'll see. A lot of change here. So but people around the league still question, like, why you, when you're winning organization, why do you have so much change? Because some of it's forward thinking.
Yep.
Some of it is you also want to promote people that you think are good under you. So again,
how long before we got robots just making the pick for the we introduce Mr. Roboto as our new AGM.
It's funny you say that because I was watching a Styx video with Mr. Roboto last week. I can't believe you said that. Anyway.
Domo.
Right. But the fact of the matter is they've had a lot of change, and this is. I mean, I'd have to research 2 or 3 years ago, even if, like, how many people are left from 2 or 3 years ago? Very little. So
no, I can't remember such a massive overhaul like this.
But it's almost all on the scouting side. The only person that I know of left on the operations side was Catherine to be assistant GM.
Mm-hmm.
So she replaced. It's funny. She replaced. Who's the guy?
Kwesi.
Right. Well, right. She interviewed with Kwesi. And right, she replaced Kwesi in
Right.
Minnesota, and then did she interview for the same job that Kwesi had for the G?
She did. She
Yeah.
interviewed for the GM job of the Vikings, didn't get it. Kwesi, Adolfo Mensa, who was with the Browns at the time, got the job. So now she's going to the Browns to take the job that Kwesi leaves behind. It's a wild world in the NFL. Yeah, I know, right? All the musical chairs going on there. All right, let's take a second to remind our listeners and our friends about our friends at PHLSportsNation.com. They are enhancing the fans' experience with their coverage of all Philadelphia sports teams. For the fan, by the fan is their motto, so check them out at PHLSportsNation.com and on Twitter at PHLSportsNation. Let's pause real quick also to hear for a word from our other great sponsors and friends, including Sky Motor Cars. And if you head out there to Sky Motor Cars in Westchester, PA, make sure you tell them Adam and Geoff sent you. You will get a great deal. All right, so John Gannon met the media. We've had James Bradberry had his press conference. I was there for the press conference. Josh Sweat totally had forgotten about the ordeal that this poor guy had to go through when he missed the playoff game against Tampa Bay, going to the hospital, having the stomach issues. He revealed he had internal bleeding. He's fine now. He's recovered. But, I mean, the biggest game of your professional career for him at the time that was. And he said he didn't even know what brought it on. You know, like there's no concrete evidence that, you got hit here. Or that. He said he was on his couch watching TV. Next thing you know, his stomach's killing him. Then he's in the hospital, and then they're talking about internal bleeding. That's pretty scary. It really is.
I remember we were doing our pregame show with Vaughn and Cosell, and the Eagles announced that something happened. It's serious. He's in the hospital. We were like in shock. Like, what?
Right.
Like, where does this come from? And thank goodness he's fine. But that's incredibly scary, and that's why Kerrigan, if you remember, wound up playing as many snaps as he did. He had a couple. Did he? I know he had at least 2 sacks in that game against.
He did have 2 sacks. Played a lot that game. Yeah. Yeah.
So thank goodness Josh is okay. But that was interesting. And then, as you mentioned, Gannon talked, and you were there. You got your questions in.
Got a few questions in, yeah. And before we even get to Gannon, obviously there was another move in the secondary. The Eagles had claimed, nickel cornerback Jimmy Moreland off waivers from the Texans. This is a guy the Eagles had their eyes on last year. He's a weird dude in that, he's a nickel corner, really feisty player, physical player. I would say there's nothing outstanding about him. He was a 7th-round pick of Washington, and he's now on his 3rd team in 3 years. But 2 times he was claimed off waivers. I mean, somebody has to want you decently to claim your contract off. Well, not that he makes a lot of money, but the point is they claimed him off waivers because they feared that somebody else was going to get him, and they wanted him. So a wanted guy. I think he adds a physical nature to this defense, scrappy player. But I know a lot of people think that because he's a nickel that there's some grand plan now to move Avonte Maddox to safety, and I think you and I can both just say pretty authoritatively right now that is not in the plans, yes.
No, what he can do is he'll be the backup nickel slot. He could play on the outside. He could play inside. He's better inside. He's scrappy, as he said. He also helped on special teams. I'll say this. They've really addressed their special teams this offseason in terms of coverage. Mm-hmm. They're going to have that. There's no question about it. They'll be better there. Now, the people would ask us about the punter. They have not brought a punter in that I know of. Maybe unless you saw a transaction about a punter, I didn't see one. So
right,
we'll see if they've got that issue with Sipos, if that fixed. Because boy, he started off well and then really faded.
Right.
They got Jake Elliott fixed. Man, he had a great year. So good job by Tyler Brown. But they got to get the punter going there. They got to get the return game going.
Yeah.
Which they've addressed that with a couple of roster moves. But
right.
Yeah, so it's a good move, Jimmy Moreland. It's if he gets to training camp, he does well in with their practice this year. They get him to training camp, see if he can make the team. And quite frankly, there are roles open for backup corners on this football team. There's no question about it.
Yeah, it does feel. I mean, I don't know, but it feels like Zach McPherson now has competition to win that backup slot job, which you would have thought the Eagles, and maybe they still do. Imagine that they would want Zach McPherson to have that job, and Zach was a good special teamer as well. He was one of their core special teams players with Sachere and who's the linebacker? Sean Bradley, who all do a pretty good job for their special teams. So I know some people might interpret this as, maybe they're not happy with McPherson. No, I don't think it's that. I think it's just getting a talented kid. But if I'm Zach McPherson, though, I'm thinking, man, they just brought in a guy who's, survived in this league for a few years, being a 7th-round pick. I got to be on my A game now, which is good. You want competition.
We have a roster show coming up in a couple weeks. We're going to do both sides of the football. And to me, they still need competition for McPherson on the outside because Bradberry's going to start. And as you said, McPherson could play inside or outside. Moreland, to me, is more of an inside player. And so Moreland could back up Maddox. And right now, McPherson is their 3rd outside corner. So he's 1 injury away from starting. To me, for a team that's had a great offseason in terms of roster moves, and they've upgraded the roster, to me, that's too risky for me. For guys not done it before,
right?
I would bring in one more guy. I bring a veteran. To me, this team has a real chance to win the NFC East. And why not go for it and bring in one more guy?
Right. I agree with you. Well, do I agree with you? I know we debated this. I can see it. I can understand that. I want to shift to Gannon and something he said about. He said that they plan to. He's going to play the same coverages and schemes as he did last year. And so, to me, when you say that, what you're saying is the things that didn't work were not my schemes or my coverage concepts. It was that my personnel. Okay, he didn't say that, but I'm saying when you make that remark that we're going to do the same things, that makes me think, okay, well, now that you got, and trust me, there was no bigger beneficiary of this entire offseason than Jonathan Gannon. People say Jalen Hurts because he got A.J. Brown. That's great. But Gannon literally got players at every single position of his defense, every level of his defense, and in many cases, many upgrades. So if he's going to play the same coverages with the better personnel, then I go back to last year and think, why for 8 weeks did you play coverages with the wrong personnel? Because he's never admitted that he had the wrong personnel verbally, but based on what he said this past week, he's basically telling you I didn't have the guys doing what I wanted them to do. And that to me showed that there was some, I don't want to say slow to adjust, because I think it's not like he didn't see what was going on in front of his eyes. I think it was stubbornness to adjust. I think he felt like he was going to coach the concepts into the players, and if it didn't work, they weren't doing a good enough job, instead of looking at it and saying, I've got players who are not accustomed to doing what I want them to do, and a couple of OTAs and a truncated training camp was not enough time to get them ready to do what I want them to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's how it came off to me. I mean, when I kind of put together all of his statements, so that, I don't know, I left that press conference thinking, this guy's got a lot to prove this year, man. He really does.
He does. If you look at the first half of last season, there are some games where they just got housed. And quite frankly, the full season, it's just some bad games. They started off great against Atlanta. He's a first-time coordinator, so he's got to figure it out. He's new to the team. First time he's calling a defense. He's got to see what works and what doesn't work. That's why they played so much zone, more than any NFL team by far, by the way. It wasn't even close. They were the number 1 zone team in the NFL for the first half. In fact, if you really look at it, the first 10 games, then they went with not heavy man, but they started playing some man coverage.
Yep.
So the question would be going forward, now that you have this talent, you've got Bradberry. We know he's better in zone, but how much man will you play? To me, they're going to be still heavy zone based on Bradberry and kind of the lack of depth at corner. You're going to have to play more zone. That's just the way it is. But right. I'd like to see. I want to see if they can play man, and are they going to be matchup specific because they have better depth now at certain positions, particularly at linebacker. They finally have linebackers who could cover. Hello.
Yeah. However, when your strong side linebacker plays on the line of scrimmage and is not a cover guy, Quentin Michael brought up a great point. Who defends the wheel routes? It's an area.
The guys in the box, right. Well, though they're not going to. I don't see that on the. I don't see them playing on the ball as much anymore.
What do you mean?
Well, no, I don't see. They're not gonna play the Gennard Avery role. The Gennard Avery role, I don't see that being part of this much anymore, if at all. How they would line up Avery right over the ball.
Yeah.
I don't I don't know if that's going to be.
Oh, it's absolutely going to be. That's Hassan Reddick on first and second down. He's the strong side linebacker on the line. That's a 5-2 front.
But again, they're going to play 34 defense. They're going to play 34 this year.
See, I'm not convinced of that. I think it's a 30. Wait, you can play a 3-4, but still have a resemblance of a 5-2 because 3-4 is your line, your defensive line alignment. So Quentin Michael is pointing this out. He thinks they're going to come out with Jordan Davis over the center as your nose, and he's going to be flanked by Javon Hargrave and Fletcher Cox, right? So that's your kind of inside power. And then on the outside, you're going to have Josh Sweat in almost like a 7 or a 9 technique, like really spread out because that's the best technique for him.
He was incredible.
Exactly.
Was really good at 9.
Exactly. Yeah. And then Hassan Reddick on the line. That's it's a you can call it a 3-4 front because really the 3-4 is your 3 are your down linemen who are Jordan Davis, Hargrave, and Cox, and then your outside edge are Reddick and Sweat in a 9 technique or 7 technique, whatever, 7 or 9 if he's standing up is kind of like an outside linebacker in that formation. So it's a 3-4 alignment, but that looks 5-2 because you got 5 guys down on the line of scrimmage. I absolutely think that's what it's going to look like. And that's why I think the question is, that's fine. That's what they did last year. But how are you going to defend certain areas of the field when your strong side linebacker, Hassan Reddick, is not adept at dropping and patrolling those areas?
And he also is not a run. He's not a run game guy. I remember talking to the Panthers about him. They, in their tape study of Arizona, they thought there was only one way he could survive and thrive.
Mm-hmm.
Is just let him run and chase.
Right.
Go chase the quarterback.
Right.
He's small. He's not Avery and Reddick are around in terms of height around the same size, but Avery was really strong.
Yeah.
Very thick legs and thick lower body.
Correct.
Strong guy for kind of sawed off. Where Reddick is just a twitchy guy, super twitchy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and then obviously nickel, you don't run a 34. Nickel, with pass rush rolls, you're definitely standing him up. He's just going to rush.
Right.
But I'm not. I just think he's a little smaller. We'll see how much he lines up in the box like that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a fair point. I mean, he's not. We know he's not a drop and cover guy at all, and he's not necessarily an asset in run defense. Now, sometimes you don't have to. Like you're just setting the edge as a 5-2. You're just making sure that the running back has to go even wider, but you still got to make the tackle. Right. You still got to get that. You may have to have the tight end get off his block or something like that, or even the left tackle. So yeah. It'll be really interesting to see. But there's no doubt in my mind that if you're going to be a predominantly zone team, that lends yourself to not being a very heavy blitzing team. I mean, you can blitz out of zone. We talked about Tampa Bay last year. Todd Bowles loves to blitz and somehow blitzed out of zone concepts more so than anybody in the league. But even he doesn't normally do that. He did that because he was missing a bunch of guys on defense last year. So I don't know. So you better hope the front four. The front four and the back end got to be more synonymous this year. They can't be like last year. They got to be able to tighten up the coverage to help the front four get home and vice versa.
I'm really interested to see what this thing looks like at training camp. Because they have new linebackers, and you talk about them not blitzing, and Gannon doesn't believe really much in blitzing. Right. So these guys are going to have to get home. Reddick's going to have to get home. Their line is going to have to get home. Brandon Graham's coming back from a serious injury. Sweat's their one guy that's returning that could rush the passer from the outside standpoint. Right. Now you have Cox, who's older now. Hargrave is a good player. Let's see if they dominate all that because they're going to change up their front looks. Now he's saying the coverages are going to be relatively the same. Mm-hmm. And that by the way, we were told it's mostly Vikings coverages. That's where his coverages are from. That's from a very strong source. So if he's going to run them again, great. But having James Bradberry is key because without James Bradberry, you're not doing that. You need someone who can cover.
Absolutely, 100%. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for this edition of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles Intel. I hope everybody has a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Our next podcast will come out Memorial Day on Monday because we will stick to the schedule, and we'll have more to talk about. Until then, everybody have a great weekend, and thanks for tuning in to Inside Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles Intel, and of course, big thanks to Hunter Brody, our producer. Check out his work on YouTube. His channel is called Sports Talk with Broads, and his website is broadsmedia.com. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.